Those are just words. Real value comes from humanistic situational ethics in the real world.
I got a question for both of you. For millennium, religion has defining God for us. I'm going to create a hypothetical situation because you don't like them, so I thought I'd throw one out there. Suppose science had found a God or an entity or a spirit that was actually promoted the first cause, that was the creator of the universe. However, science was able to characterize this entity as not being all-powerful, as not being able to think, as having no qualities of man, of not knowing even if man was here, and having no direction for us. Would either one of you gentlemen be willing to call that entity God in a new definition?
You want to answer it? No. What you just defined is very close to what we might call deism. Deism is not theism. Theism is the belief in a personal God. Kyle is a theist. He believes in a personal God. But deists, with a D, are people, Thomas Jefferson was a deist. Thomas Paine was a deist. Many of the pre-Darwinian Enlightenment thinkers were deists. They thought pretty much like that. There is no personal being who writes books and who does miracles and who talks to us. But there might have been some force that started it all. And Thomas Paine said there's no Bibles except when you look at nature. That's the Bible of this deistic God. So if by the word God you mean the capital G God of theism, then no, I would not call that God. But if by the word God you mean the lowercase g God of deism, well then yeah, but it's not anything what any of us in this room are thinking of as a God. We might call it the Force. Or we might call it the great tentacles of the spaghetti monster. Oh, I don't know. But
let me address your question. The fact of the matter is that science has come to the overwhelming conclusion that there is a God. In fact, the scientist of the last century, the scientist who started much of the scientific endeavor, said that they were thinking God's thoughts after him. Every single legitimate scientific law that we know for a fact points overwhelmingly to the fact that there has to be an intelligent personal designer. Life spontaneously generating? Well, we have done 150 years of experiments on trying to get life from non-living chemicals, and every single one of those has verified the fact that life comes only from previously existing life of its own kind. That's a scientific fact. It's not a pie-in-the-sky, some fringe, radical, rabid person out there has come up with the idea and projected it on human society. That's been the foundation of science from the very beginning, finding the truth, and that truth happens to correspond perfectly with what the Bible describes as God.
Yes, I was thinking about the analogy you had with the laptop, and that's not really valid because it doesn't have a way to produce offspring that inherit its traits and stuff, but as human organisms we do. And you say that the human body itself can't just randomly happen. That's not what science says. It says it happened gradually. So over billions of years, why could the human body not be produced by natural selection and gene mutation?
There are several reasons why it cannot. Now, he made a statement. He said that that's not a valid analogy. Now, that's an assertion. No offense. He's got nothing to back that up. He's just saying that. The truth is, it is a valid analogy. In fact, the thing that he gave for reasons why, he said, well, because humans can reproduce, he gave us more complexity. So he said, well, it's not a valid analogy because humans can do more than the laptop computer. Well, maybe it's an insufficient analogy. Maybe I need to find something else that humans have designed that would come closer to the complexity of a brain, but we don't have anything. That was the best that I've got. Now, the second statement was, well, what if we had billions of years to come up with the human body? Suppose right now that... Well, forget that hypothetical. Let me say this. Number one, and understand this, you do not have billions of years. There is no legitimate valid, factual studies that will give you billions of years. Number two, and probably the strongest, you can't get off the ground. You have to have, ultimately, life come from non-life. Now, often the creationist is berated for saying, well, you believe things that you haven't seen. You ever met anybody who said, I've seen life come from non-life? Never seen a person do it, but it's presented in every one of your first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade books as a scientific fact, and it's nothing of the sort. One of the reasons that you can't get the human body is because you can't even get the first cell from non-life.
The questioner is right. The laptop computer is a bad analogy because computers are not self-replicating. In fact, a computer, in a sense, have you ever interacted with a computer and you talk to it and you yell at it and that program seems, it's not a living thing, but you're having a relationship with that thing. That computer is made out of non-life, and yet it is functioning. It is not the stuff that it's made of that makes it alive, it's its organization. There's nothing in your body and my body that doesn't come from non-life. We are made out of the basic elements that are out there, and it's the arrangement of it that matters. So the beauty of Darwinism is the self-replication, and of course the variation between the self-replication. What you just said completely misrepresents science. The fact of evolution is the strongest fact in biology ever. It has been repeatedly tested through multiple lines. Natural selection, evolution through natural selection, is the only thing that makes sense of who we are as a species. You and I are related to each other genetically in some way. We have a common ancestor somewhere back there. I don't know whether, maybe it's closer than we think. No, we have a common ancestor closer than that. And I bet it's 3 or 4 or 5 generations ago. I bet we could come back to that point. But when you go back, evolution is not a ladder. It's not a chain. You're obviously misinformed about what evolution is. It's wonderful if you will study it and read it. It is mind-expanding in what it teaches us about who we really are as human beings. Evolution is a bush. You and I are somehow long-distant cousins from each other based on a simple ancestor, and we're not the same. You and I are different from each other. Speciation happens at that level over billions of years. That is a fact of science.
Mr. Barker, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your patience, and I really appreciate the viewpoints you've brought here today, and they really challenged me and made me think. One thing you asked Mr. Butt earlier was, what's one thing that, if true, would falsify your belief? And I just want to know, for you, what's that one falsifying fact?
Yeah, good. So you get the question, right? Falsifiability is important, if for nothing else than to point out the honesty of saying, here is what would prove me wrong, go for it. How many people are honest? I'll give you one example or maybe two, but there are thousands that I could think of. If Kyle were to pray and ask God, because the Bible says, all things whatsoever you shall ask in prayer believing, you shall receive, right? If Kyle were to pray and ask God to predict something, and Kyle were to turn to me and say, God told me, Dan, that tomorrow at 12:14 p.m. a meteorite from the southwest at 85 degrees would strike your house, not my house, go through the Navajo rug on the second floor, go down into the basement, and end up 17 inches below the basement floor, composed of 72% iron, 1% iridium, 3% nickel, and so on. And then if that happened, exactly as you told me that God told you would predict it, I would say, oops, my atheism is falsified, right? So if Jesus were to materialize on this stage, he did it before, according to your belief system. He materialized through solid door, and he floated into the sky. If he were to materialize here and speak to us and tell us the exact geographical coordinates where the Ark of the Covenant is buried in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land, and if we were to go over there to that point and dig it up and find it, I would say, oops, atheism's wrong. I could come up with a lot of stuff like that. What can you come up with that would falsify your hypothesis?